Welcome back. Don't forget you can subscribe to the Spectator Australia and try it for 1 month for free. And if you love getting your hands on a print copy, we've got 10 issues of the magazine for just $10. It's the best deal around for independent and entertaining commentary. Well, the anonymous spy outed by ASIO has been circulating at the top of the news cycle all weekend. The ABC hasn't ruffled a single feather over Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's determination to protect the identity of the traitor. Meanwhile, former Prime Minister Paul Keating, the recession we had to have bloke, has gone on a vicious rant directed at ASIO boss Mike Burgess. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, Keating was, and I quote, accusing him of trying to undermine the Albanese government's efforts to stabilise relations with China and claiming the spy boss should be sacked after the last federal election, end quote. Now, what a bizarre and un-Australian take from Keating. What is Keating's point? That ASIO should shut up about treacherous former ministers on the public purse in case they hurt the feelings of a communist regime? I am disgusted by Keating, and Beijing certainly wouldn't protect a traitor they found stealing secrets for Australia. If our former Prime Ministers do not care about outing traitors, then what does that say about the character of those who lead us? Dodginess on the left side of politics is nothing new. Joining me to discuss the communist roots of anti-nuclear sentiment is Senior Lecturer in Political Science and Economics, Michael de Percy. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alexandra. It's great to be back.
Michael, the nuclear debate in Australia is heating up after opposition leader Peter Dutton started picking out places where the party might consider putting reactors. It was good news for Conservatives, but a huge departure from the anti-nuclear, pro-renewable stance of the Morrison government, and it immediately triggered this scare campaign from the left. Now, people usually dismiss the screechy anti-nuclear left as hippies, but you've written an article saying that the left's opposition to nuclear energy might have some communist roots. Michael, what's going on?
That's right. It really goes back to the end of the Second World War and the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And after that, there was this movement within the United Nations where the Americans were going to share nuclear technology with the Russians and others, but they would then sign this treaty, which they would effectively basically dismantle their remaining atomic weapons and have this inspection regime. And there was a kind of a push from Oppenheimer in particular for a world government, and it came out of the Burke Plan. And we actually had a guy by the name of Bowker in Australia who was pushing the same sort of idea of this world government. But out of that, of course, world government is part of the Internationale, which is the great communist idea of overthrowing nation states and, you know, creating a global working class that totally gets rid of nation states and governments. So that whole sort of idea fed into that. But the interesting thing is that Australia's nuclear program actually began under the Chifley government, and that happened in 1946 because the Americans weren't going to give the British their nuclear technology. So they were looking for somewhere else to test their own. And of course, they've just been devastated by a world war. Russia in 1949 develops its own bomb. So in the year that Menzies comes to power, the Russians have their own nuclear weapons. So the British think, well, we've got to do something to defend ourselves. And of course, Australia knows that Britain can't defend it. America's exhausted after the Second World War. So Australia's thinking about it as well. So in amongst this sort of mix, we have like the traditional Labor and Conservatives wanting to defend our nation using nuclear weapons. But the Internationale, they sort of want to protect Russia. And we even have this sort of whole spy series of things that leads to the Australians facilitating the leaking of British intelligence back to the Soviet Union through the Communist Party.
I want to talk about that because the reason I started with a rant directed at the left regarding spies is because of what you wrote here. Now, we always hear about the left criticising Prime Minister and Conservative legend Robert Menzies for his attempt to ban the Communist Party of Australia. Now, when I heard that story, it was originally told by the commies who were like, oh, poor us, we're being persecuted and censored for no reason at all by the Conservatives. But you pointed out that it's because Menzies went after the Communist Party after they were found sending British intelligence to the Soviet Union via the Australian Soviet Embassy in Canberra. Now, espionage sounds like a pretty good reason to ban a political party, no?
Well, I think it's not unjustified, the approach that Menzies took. It's probably against liberal democracy in terms of banning. But look, we've banned terrorist organisations now, and it hasn't necessarily taken away from our civil liberties, so to speak. But look, the interesting thing is the way that the narrative's been crafted, and something I'm really keen on doing now is to go back and look at these narratives that the left have created. And one of the most interesting things for me was that the McClelland Royal Commission, which looked at British nuclear tests in Australia, it began from 1952, which meant that nobody could go back and look at what the Labor Party people had been involved in that whole process. So the whole narrative focused on Menzies, and Menzies being this sort of bad person for introducing these tests. But it all stems from the Chifley government in 1946. But of course, because the McClelland Commission, its terms of reference begin in 1952, then it's all focused on Menzies. And we see that whole there's a whole story that begins from that sort of communist intervention, the McClelland Commission, that extends into the present. And we're seeing it where Labor's absolutely refusing to engage with nuclear technology. And the thing is, if it's all about global warming and addressing climate change, nuclear is doing this everywhere else in the world. So it can't just be about that. There's got to be something else that's going on here. I'm really interested to sort of follow this sort of through into the present and see where it leads.
Well, interesting enough, Michael, the left are still in bed with the communist and socialist regimes, even if they've rebranded themselves. I mean, we've got some who've been accused of serving the goals of the UN in Davos instead of Australia, and they are very much the old international socialist repackaged, where they want a one-world government of carbon slaves rather than actual gulag slaves. Now, when the left did, as you said, 50 years ago and tried to stop the nuclear campaign to service the socialists, well, this time around, it's the socialists and the communists like China who are making all the money out of renewable energy and keeping Australia out of the nuclear game. Now, maybe, just maybe, Michael, what do you think of the idea that the left like this anti-nuclear stance because it keeps their mates in the communist regimes happy, selling us all their technology under the table, and we remain dependent on the socialist regime?
I really hope I don't find any of that evidence. But look, like I said, though, if in terms of a narrative, there seems to be a narrative that's anti-nuclear that stems from those communist roots. And like I say, it goes right back to Oppenheimer, the Barrack Plan, right through to Bowker in Australia, and then it continues through. And it was interesting that we sort of see elements of the Liberal Party in the 1970s when McMahon takes over. He was a nuclear skeptic, and whereas Gorton was actually pushing for the Jervis Bay nuclear plant to go ahead, and he wanted it to actually produce nuclear weapons in order to defend Australia. But McMahon pretty much undid that. Even though Gorton signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, he didn't ratify it, but the Whitlam government then comes along and ratifies it. And we sort of see this sort of glorious denouncing of nuclear energy that happens from the left. I wonder if we were to do a counterfactual look back at the 1955 DLP split, effectively all of the anti-communists left the Labor Party, and I wonder to what extent we were left with the extreme left-wing elements of the Labor Party into the present, who otherwise would have been there, had they not left.
Oh, well, I'm expecting an article on that from you, Michael, now that you've declared it. Now, I want to talk quickly about AI algorithms. By now, everyone has come across Google's overtly racist Gemini program, which has been shut down after it fabricated historical settings and spewed out defamatory content about conservatives. But it opens a wider conversation about the saturation of identity politics in the internet and the future of AI, because don't forget, it's not just that Silicon Valley wants to run their own little programs. They are in discussions with our governments to embed AI into government systems. Michael, what's your take?
It's really obvious when you actually do an experiment. And so what I was doing just the other day, I thought I would ask one of the AI programs to write an article, a Spectator article, in the style of Michael de Percy, on socialism. And it went on to say how great socialism is. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I am a classical liberal, and there is no way on earth that I would ever say that socialism was great. I don't think that. I don't believe it. I'm willing to fight against it. And the really interesting thing, though, was that it kept coming back back to saying how socialism had this grand ideal, and while there were problems, it was certainly an element of saving humanity. Now, the only article that I was able to get that was even close to what it should be in reality was when I asked it to write a speech by Donald Trump. And I dare say it's because there's so much that is on the net from him that it was able to replicate him appropriately. But look, I urge people to experiment with these various AI programs, and you will see how inherently biased they are. And they're all biased in a woke left fashion. It's remarkable.
Yes, well, I think it's worth quoting Twitter CEO Elon Musk, who said of Google's Gemini project, "Google Gemini is super racist and sexist. I'm glad that Google overplayed their hand with their AI image generation, as it made their insane, racist, anti-civilizational programming clear to all." He went on to add, given that Gemini AI will be at the heart of every Google product and YouTube, this is extremely alarming, end quote. But I mean, look, it's not just Google Gemini. Microsoft created a little AI bot called Tay, which became basically a Nazi in 24 hours and had to be put down quietly. Pretty much all of humanity's AI bots have been psychopaths. Now, we've only got about 30 seconds here, Michael, but what do you think if we keep creating completely mental and nutjob robots, that perhaps we should, I don't know, chill out a little bit and stop playing God for a while until we work out why we keep getting it wrong? Because we're not very good tech parents.
I think we really need to take individual responsibility and stop trying to get everyone else to look after it for us. I think that's what's happening, and it's failing.
Yes, well, I agree with you, and I think that Silicon Valley needs to be really, really, really careful about what they create, because while we might laugh at attempts to write Michael de Percy articles on socialism, it could become a lot more serious than that in the near future. But look, thank you, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today.
Thanks again. Great to be here.